The moment Caleb Dunmore's hand grazed her shoulder, 500 pairs of eyes turned to stone. He had not meant it. That was the thing about fate in the West. It never asked permission before it arrived. One stumble on loose gravel, one hand thrown out instinctively for balance, 1 second where the world tilted beneath dusty boots, and a man could find himself staring down the drawn bows of 500 Sioux warriors with nothing between him and eternity but a few feet of sacred ground and his own hammering heartbeat. The woman stood perfectly still. She did not flinch. She did not cry out. She simply turned her dark, luminous eyes toward him with an expression that was neither anger nor fear. It was something older and quieter than either, something that lived in the space between a question and its answer. Her black hair hung in 2 thick braids past her shoulders, threaded with turquoise beads that caught the late afternoon light like drops of captured sky. She wore a dress of soft elk hide, decorated with fine quill work along the hem and sleeves, and around her wrists were bands of hammered silver that had been worn smooth by years of wear. She was, without question, the most composed person in a scene that had just become the most dangerous place on the entire frontier. Behind her, Tall Bear rose from his seated position with the slow, deliberate power of a mountain deciding to move. He was not a short man. He was not a young man. He was somewhere past 50, with a face carved by decades of wind and sun into something that belonged less to flesh than to the red rock of the canyon walls. His dark eyes held no panic and no confusion. They held only the absolute, unshakable certainty of a man who had never needed to raise his voice to command every room he entered. The eagle feathers in his hair stirred in the dry breeze. He said nothing. He did not need to. Around Caleb, the encampment erupted into a silence so total it was louder than any war cry. 500 warriors. He had counted them as he rode in, not out of strategic thinking, but out of the same nervous habit a man develops when he senses he is somewhere he should not be. They had been settling in for the evening council, their horses tethered along the creek, their fires just beginning to catch. Now every one of them was still, and every weapon was in a hand, and every eye was on Caleb Dunmore, 27 years old, from Laramie by way of a cattle drive gone wrong, standing in the heart of a Sioux encampment with the sacred wife of its greatest chief less than an arm's length away. His name was Caleb Dunmore, and up until this moment, the worst trouble he had ever found himself in was a card game in Abilene that ended with a broken table and a 3-day walk to the next town. He was a lean young man, the kind of lean that comes not from poverty, but from a life lived constantly in motion. His hair was the color of dark oak, slightly too long, pushed back from a broad forehead under a brown hat that had seen better decades. His eyes were the pale, clear gray of high-altitude skies, set in a face that was honest and open in the way that made people trust him perhaps more than they should. He had a good jaw and good hands and a way of standing that suggested he was always ready to work, but his holster was tied down and his revolver was, God help him, still in his hand, because he had drawn it 3 minutes ago when he heard movement in the brush and thought it might be the mountain lion that had been following his trail since sundown yesterday. He had not yet put it back. It was, perhaps, the single most dangerous thing about the situation. Caleb did not move. He breathed. He thought about every story he had ever heard about the Sioux, about Tall Bear specifically, about what happened to men who violated the sacred customs of this nation and lived to tell it, which was a number that could be counted on the fingers of one hand. He thought about his horse, Cobalt, tied to a cottonwood back at the tree line, probably still chewing on a clump of dry grass, unaware that his rider had just walked into the most dangerous moment in the history of the territory. Then, very slowly, Caleb Dunmore did the only thing he could think of to do. He holstered his gun. He did it with 2 fingers, deliberately, so that every watching eye could see exactly what he was doing and could not mistake it for anything else. The snap of the leather holster clasp sounded enormous in the silence. Then he removed his hat, pressed it to his chest, and looked directly at Tallbear. "He asked forgiveness," he said in the only 3 words of Lakota he knew, which he had learned from a trapper called Reuben Flood, who had spent 15 years among the people and had made a point of teaching useful phrases to anyone who would listen. The silence stretched. A fire crackled. A horse stamped somewhere. The wind moved through the tall grass at the edge of the camp with a sound like breathing. Tallbear looked at him for a very long time. Caleb had ridden into this part of Wyoming territory 4 days ago, following the remnants of a cattle drive that had come apart at the seams somewhere north of Cheyenne. He worked as a hand for the Harmon outfit, 1,500 head, 3 months on the trail, the kind of job that paid well enough to reset a man's finances, but cost him something in the joints and the sleep. The drive had been going smoothly until the Harmon brothers had a falling out over money somewhere outside Fort Laramie, and the whole enterprise had dissolved overnight like sugar and rain, leaving 12 cowboys standing in a field with their horses and their wages and no particular direction. Most of the hands had turned south toward Cheyenne. 2 of them rode east toward Nebraska, chasing a rumor about a new ranch paying top dollar for experienced riders. Caleb had gone north, which was not a rational decision, but was the kind of decision that had characterized most of his movements since he left home at 16, with a bedroll and a borrowed horse, and a vague conviction that the world was wider and more interesting than the small Missouri town where he had grown up. He was looking for a friend. His name was Jerome Galt, and they had grown up 3 farms apart, and Jerome had come west 2 years ahead of Caleb and sent back a letter from a town called Pine Ridge, up in the shadow of the Bighorn Mountains, saying that the land up there was something a man had to see to believe, that he had found work at a ranch there, and that there was room for another rider if Caleb ever made it up that way. That letter was 18 months old. Caleb had been trying to get to Pine Ridge since he read it. The country between the Laramie Range and the Bighorns was not easy country. It was beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when they are also completely indifferent to whether you live or die. The grass ran gold and pale green across rolling hills cut by sudden ravines. The creeks ran cold and clear and disappeared into the earth without warning. There were antelope and mule deer, and increasingly the long-legged shadows of the things that hunted them. Caleb had been following a rough trail marked on a map he had bought from a surveyor in Casper, but the trail had become increasingly theoretical over the past day and a half, and he had started to suspect that the surveyor had been generous with his pencil in portions of the map that he himself had not actually visited. He had heard the Sioux encampment before he saw it, the sound of drums, distant and rhythmic, carrying on the evening air like a heartbeat beneath the land. He had almost turned around. Any sane man would have turned around, but his water was low and he had not eaten since morning, and the sound of drums meant people, and people meant fire and water, and Caleb Dunmore was not precisely a reckless man. He was a man who had a high tolerance for calculated risk and a tendency to underestimate the calculation required. He had ridden toward the sound. If you're enjoying this story, please consider subscribing to the channel. There are many more tales from the Old West waiting for you, and your support makes each one possible. He had done it respectfully. He had kept his hands visible. He had not drawn his weapon until he heard the brush snap to his left in the gathering dark, and his instincts, honed by 3 months on a cattle drive through territory with an active mountain lion population, had taken over before his brain could catch up. He had cleared the tree line with his revolver out, scanned for the lion, found nothing, and then looked up and found himself 20 feet from the edge of a Sioux encampment of considerable size and considerably more people than he had expected. He had started to back up. That was when his boot caught the loose gravel at the edge of the trail, and his weight had gone sideways, and his right hand had shot out for balance, and it had found not a fence post or a tree trunk or empty air, but the soft elk-hide-covered shoulder of a woman who had been walking quietly in his direction, and the world had stopped. Tall Bear spoke. He spoke in Lakota, and Caleb did not understand the words, but he understood the tone the way you understand the sound of a string being pulled tight on a bow. There was a question in it, and the question was aimed at him, and the answer he gave would determine whether he walked out of this camp or was carried out of it. Caleb looked at the woman. He could feel the weight of 500 weapons. He could feel the tension in the air like the pressure before a thunderstorm. He looked at Tall Bear and then at the woman, and he put his hand over his heart and shook his head slowly, deliberately, making the gesture as clear as he could. It was an accident. I did not mean it. I would not have touched her. The woman spoke. Her voice was calm and clear, and she spoke to Tall Bear in Lakota, and whatever she said seemed to carry weight, because several of the warriors nearest to Caleb shifted slightly, not lowering their weapons, but changing the angle of them in a way that suggested the air had changed by some small fraction of a degree. Tall Bear looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Caleb again, and this time the look was different, not the absolute granite of before, but something more evaluative. He was being weighed. He could feel it in the same way you can feel the sun on your skin without looking up at it. A man stepped forward from the line of warriors. He was younger than Tall Bear, perhaps 35, with a broad, angular face and eyes that missed nothing. He wore a blanket around his shoulders despite the heat, and his hair was shorter than the other warriors, which Caleb had learned meant something, though he could not recall what. He stopped 10 feet away and studied Caleb with an expression that was entirely clinical. "You speak English?" the man said. It was not a question. Caleb exhaled a breath he had been holding for approximately 2 minutes. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I do. My name is Caleb Dunmore. I was following a trail to Pine Ridge. I heard your camp and came for water. I did not mean to enter without permission, and I swear on everything I have, I did not mean to touch the woman. I stumbled on the gravel." The man translated. Tall Bear listened, his expression unchanged. "She is running deer," the man said. "She is the wife of Tall Bear. To touch her without permission is—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "It is an insult that requires answer." "I understand. I am sorry. I will accept whatever judgment Tall Bear considers fair." The man's eyes narrowed slightly. "That is a dangerous thing to say." "I know," Caleb said. "I mean it anyway." Another exchange. The man whose name Caleb did not yet know translated, and Running Deer spoke again, and this time several warriors murmured among themselves in a way that sounded less like anger and more like deliberation. Tall Bear looked at his wife for a long moment, then back at Caleb, then at the revolver on Caleb's hip. "He asks," the translator said, "why you came into a Sioux camp alone with a weapon drawn after sunset." "I heard something in the brush. I thought it was a mountain lion. There has been one tracking me since yesterday. I drew my weapon for the lion, not for your people. By the time I understood where I was already here." The translator conveyed this. There was another long, charged silence. Then, unexpectedly, Tall Bear spoke a single word, and around Caleb the weapons began, slowly, deliberately, with great dignity, to be lowered. Not all of them, not quickly, but enough. "He says," the translator told Caleb, with something that might have been the ghost of a dry smile at the corners of his mouth, "he says that only a very foolish man or a very honest one would walk into a Sioux camp by accident and then say he accepts whatever judgment is fair. He is not yet certain which you are." Caleb let out a long, slow breath. "Honestly," he said, "I'm not entirely certain either." His name was Standing Hawk, and he had spent 4 years at a mission school in Nebraska, which was where he had learned English. He spoke it with a precision that made most of the English-speaking men Caleb knew sound careless by comparison. He had come back to his people after those 4 years and had never left again. But he had kept the language the way a man keeps a tool, not out of sentiment, but because it was useful. He sat across from Caleb at the fire that had been assigned to him, which was at the edge of the camp, positioned in such a way that its placement communicated very clearly that Caleb was here on a provisional basis, and that the border between guest and prisoner was thinner than a blade of grass. "You are from the East," Standing Hawk said. "Missouri," Caleb said. "Born there. Left when I was 16. "Why?" Caleb thought about it honestly. The world seemed bigger in every direction than the direction I was already pointed. Standing Hawk considered this. "And now you go to Pine Ridge." "I have a friend there, Jerome Galt. We grew up together." "There is trouble in Pine Ridge," Standing Hawk said, which was the first truly alarming thing he had said in a conversation that had already contained several alarming things. Caleb looked up. "What kind of trouble?" Standing Hawk fed a stick into the fire and watched it catch. "The kind that comes when men want land that is not theirs to want." Caleb waited. In his experience, men like Standing Hawk spoke in their own time, and pressing them only made them quieter. "There is a man called Virgil Crane," Standing Hawk said at last. "He came to this territory 2 years ago. He has land. He has men. He wants more land. He has been pushing the ranchers north of Pine Ridge off their claims. Some have sold. Some have left without selling. Some," he paused, "some have not been heard from." The fire popped and threw a small constellation of sparks upward into the dark. "Jerome Galt works a ranch north of Pine Ridge," Caleb said slowly. "I do not know the name," Standing Hawk said, "but the ranch you describe, north of the town, in the shadow of the first ridge, that is in the territory Crane has been moving through." Caleb stared into the fire for a moment. The letter from Jerome was 18 months old. He had assumed the delay in getting there was simply the wayward nature of his own travels. Now, for the first time, he felt something cold and specific move through him that was not the night air. "I need to get to Pine Ridge," he said. "Yes," Standing Hawk agreed, without particular urgency, "but not tonight." "Why not tonight?" Standing Hawk looked at him with the expression of a man explaining something to someone who has not yet fully understood the nature of his situation. "Because tonight you are here, and Tall Bear has not yet decided what your punishment is for touching running deer." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "I thought the weapons went down." "The weapons went down," Standing Hawk agreed. "The judgment has not yet been made." He paused. "Running Deer spoke in your favor. She said she saw the stumble, that it was real. She is a woman of considerable standing in her own right, and Tall Bear trusts her eyes above all others. This is why you are sitting at a fire and not in the ground." "I am grateful to her," Caleb said. "Do not say that to her," Standing Hawk said immediately. "Why not?" "Because gratitude expressed directly to her implies the incident is concluded. That is Tall Bear's determination to make, not yours." He paused. "You are still being watched very carefully." "I noticed," Caleb said. "Good. Keep noticing." The night was long in the way that nights are long when sleep seems inadvisable. Caleb sat at his fire and kept it small and did not move toward any part of the camp that had not been indicated to him as acceptable. He had been given water and dried meat, both of which he accepted with as much visible gratitude and as little visible relief as he could manage. The stars came out overhead in their full western abundance, more stars than the sky seemed able to hold, and the camp settled into the rhythms of evening around him. Children's voices fading, fires banking, horses settling into the comfort of rest. He thought about Jerome.
They had been inseparable as boys, the way boys are when they live close enough to run to each other's houses and the whole world is the size of 2 farms and 1 creek. Jerome was 2 years older, taller, with a laugh that could be heard from the next field over, and a gift for finding whatever situation was the most interesting one available. He had gone west on a combination of wanderlust and practicality. The farm was his brother's, not his, and the west was where a man without inheritance went to find one. His letters had been infrequent but consistent until about 8 months ago, when they had stopped entirely. Caleb had told himself that the mail was unreliable in that country. He had told himself that Jerome was busy, that Jerome had probably moved on to a different place, and the letters were going to the wrong address. He had told himself a lot of things. Now he sat in a Sioux encampment in the Wyoming Territory and thought about a man named Virgil Crane and what Standing Hawk had meant by "some have not been heard from," and the things he had been telling himself felt considerably less convincing than they had a week ago. Standing Hawk came back to the fire an hour after the camp had gone quiet. He sat without ceremony and was silent for a while, staring into the coals. "Tall Bear has made his judgment," he said at last. Caleb waited. "You will remain in the camp for 3 days," Standing Hawk said. "During this time, you will work, whatever is needed, wood, water, tending horses, whatever is asked of you. You will do this without complaint, and you will do it well. At the end of 3 days, Tall Bear will observe what kind of man you are. If he judges you to be a man of good character who stumbled by accident, you will be given provisions and a guide to the trail north. If he judges you to be otherwise," Standing Hawk spread his hands in a gesture that was economical and expressive. 3 days, Caleb said. 3 days. Caleb thought about Jerome. 3 days felt like an eternity. 3 days also felt like the most reasonable outcome of this particular situation he could have possibly hoped for. "Agreed," he said. Standing Hawk nodded and stood. "I will wake you at first light," he said. "The horses need attention before the sun is up." The work was not easy, but it was not cruel. Caleb had grown up on a farm and spent the subsequent 11 years doing various forms of physical labor that had given him a practical usefulness that now served him better than any amount of charm or conversation could have. He carried water, he split wood, he worked with the horses, and here, perhaps, he found the thing that shifted some small quality in the way the camp looked at him, because the Sioux relationship with horses was unlike anything Caleb had encountered in his travels, and the horses sensed immediately that he approached them with genuine respect and a kind of quiet attention that they responded to. A boy watched him with the horses on the first morning. He was perhaps 10 years old, with his father's broad cheekbones and his mother's particular quality of stillness. He watched without speaking for a very long time, and then he came closer, and Caleb kept his attention on the horse and let the boy approach at his own pace, and eventually the boy was standing right beside him, watching his hands on the animal's flank with an expression of focused evaluation. "What is his name?" Caleb asked, nodding at the horse. The boy said a word in Lakota. "What does it mean in English?" The boy thought about this with considerable seriousness. "It means the color of storm clouds, but only the ones that bring rain." Caleb looked at the horse, a gray roan with darker dappling across his hindquarters, and considered this. "That's a better name than most horses I know," he said. The ghost of a smile moved across the boy's face and was gone. He watched Caleb work for another few minutes and then drifted away in the unhurried way that children have when their curiosity had been satisfied. By the second day, the quality of the watching had changed. It was not warm. That would be too much to expect from people who had been given every reason their entire history to distrust men who looked like Caleb Dunmore. But it was less hostile. There was a word for what it was, and the word was neutral, which in this context felt like a remarkable achievement.
On the second afternoon, Standing Hawk sat with him during a break in the work and told him more about Virgil Crane. He came from Texas, Standing Hawk said. He brought money and men and a paper that he said gave him rights to land along the river north of Pine Ridge. The paper was... He paused. It was not clear. There are men in this territory who make papers that say what money wants them to say. A fraudulent land claim, Caleb said. The word is not important, the effect is the same. He used the paper to push the ranchers off. Some he bought out, offered money, small money, for claims worth much more. Some he made afraid. Some, Standing Hawk was quiet for a moment. Some disappeared. You've seen this yourself? Caleb asked. We have seen the aftermath, Standing Hawk said. Empty houses, abandoned cattle, fires. He looked at the mountains to the north. Crane has also made it known that he does not want my people in his territory. He has sent men to our camps, not warriors, talking men, men with words that sound like offers but feel like threats. He's trying to push you out too, Caleb said. He is trying, Standing Hawk agreed, with a particular quality of dryness that suggested the trying had not yet amounted to much and was unlikely to. And the law? The marshal? The sheriff and Pine Ridge? Standing Hawk looked at him with an expression that required no translation. Right, Caleb said. On the third morning, Tall Bear walked to the edge of the encampment and stood looking out at the mountains for a long time, alone, which Standing Hawk told Caleb was what he did when he was making decisions. Caleb continued his work and did not look in the chief's direction more than necessary, which required more discipline than he had expected, because his entire future in the next 24 hours depended on whatever conclusion that silent man reached while looking at the distant peaks. Running Deer passed him twice in the course of the morning. The first time she did not look at him. The second time she did. A brief, direct glance that held something in it he could not quite read, something that was perhaps the Western feminine equivalent of a verdict. She had told Tall Bear what she had seen, and the rest was beyond her influence to give. Whatever happened next was up to him and to his character, and she had said what she had said, and now she would go about her life with the composed certainty of a woman who had done her part. He found himself admiring her greatly in a way that had nothing to do with anything improper and everything to do with the particular quality of dignity she carried, which was the most absolute dignity he had ever encountered in any person, anywhere. At midday, Standing Hawk came to find him. "Come," he said. Caleb washed his hands in the creek and followed. Tall Bear stood in the center of the camp with two other senior men, all three of them watching Caleb approach with an evaluative stillness of men who have made their decision and are now simply confirming what they already know. Caleb stopped at a respectful distance. He removed his hat. Tall Bear spoke at length. Standing Hawk listened, then turned to Caleb. "He says that you worked hard and without complaint, and that you treated the horses well, which tells him something useful about you. He says that Running Deer's account is consistent with what he observed himself, that you stumbled, that the touch was accidental, and that you responded with respect and immediate apology. He says that the world has too many men who cause harm without apology, and not enough who acknowledge their mistakes with honesty." Standing Hawk paused. "He says that you may go." The relief that moved through Caleb was so profound he felt it in his knees. "Please tell him that I am grateful for his fairness and his judgment, and please tell Running Deer, if it is appropriate, that her account of the truth was an act of generosity I will not forget." Running Deer turned slightly and gave him a last direct look, the look of a woman who had told the truth because it was the truth, and who asked nothing in return for it, and who expected nothing, and who was content with that. It was perhaps the most honest thing Caleb Dunmore had seen in a life that had taken him from Missouri to every dusty corner of the frontier. Tall Bear spoke one final word, and it carried the weight of a door closing, not on something bad, but on a chapter that was finished and could now be left behind. Standing Hawk translated it as the single word, "Go." Caleb put his hat back on. He retrieved cobalt from the cottonwood at the edge of camp. He rode north, with the mountains ahead of him and the camp behind him, and the story of the past 3 days settled somewhere in his chest, like a stone that had found its place. He did not know what waited in Pine Ridge. He did not know what had happened to Jerome. He did not know the shape of what was coming. He He knew only that he was still alive and that he had done what he could in a moment that had not asked for his permission to arrive, and that the West was wide, and that sometimes a man stumbled, literally, on loose gravel in the dark, and that what mattered was what he did in the moment after. The land stretched out ahead of him, gold and pale in the afternoon light. Caleb Dunmore rode north towards whatever came next, and the wind off the mountains came with him, steady and clean and indifferent to everything except the direction it was already going. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing to the channel. It costs nothing and means everything, and there are many more tales from the Old West just waiting ahead.